Good morning, everybody. My name is Steve Gold, and I teach entrepreneurship here at Olin. And I'm really delighted today to introduce you to four of our most esteemed students. They'll introduce themselves in a moment. Three of them are here at Olin currently, and just to my right is a recent graduate. He's going to tell you about some of his entrepreneurial endeavors. But before we launch into that, I just want to tell you for a moment a little bit about what we do here at Olin, because Olin's a very unique place in terms of being an engineering institution, because we place a very significant emphasis on entrepreneurship. And basically that comes in two flavors, if you will. First of all, we require all of our students to learn about entrepreneurship, and that takes the form of learning about not necessarily trying to convince students that they should be entrepreneurs, but rather what are some of the benefits relating to entrepreneurial skills and behaviors. So we have an introductory course that focuses on primarily things like strategic thinking, resourcefulness, effective communication, and really what the art and the science are behind those subjects. And then the students can go on and take some more advanced courses, including courses in new venture creation, intellectual property, and also many of our students do cross the town line here and take classes over at Babson's campus, so they can get more in-depth knowledge of subject matter like finance and management and marketing, some of the specific disciplines. So without further ado, I'm going to let... Is this actually working, or is it, okay? You hear it differently up here. So I'm going to allow each of the students to introduce themselves, tell you their name and their class, and maybe a little bit about what you're doing on the entrepreneurial front.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eamon Doyle, and I'm the alumni up here. I'm graduated class of 2009, so 2 May graduations ago. And I'm currently working at a software company called Athena Health in Boston. But in all of my copious free time, 3 of my friends and I from college are starting a business called Sandbox Engineering and Design, which is an engineering consultancy that focuses on vehicles and robotics, so automated test setups and that sort of device.
I'm Hannah Sarver. I'm a current sophomore here at Olin. And my entrepreneurship, I guess, over the summer, I was in the Foundry Incubator program here, and I started a bakery with another student, which is kind of far from the high-tech stuff that a lot of people do, but we were pretty successful over the summer, and we've tried to continue that over the school year. We're doing farmers markets still, so we're still going.
My name is Evan Morikawa. I'm current senior, and that's only because I took a year off between sophomore and junior years to start up an online education software company that we call Delight Learning. Apart from that, I also helped put together the Foundry, which is our student entrepreneurship program that we have on campus.
I'm Chris Galello. I probably know about half of you, but I'm a junior here at Olin, and I'm currently the director of the Foundry program, which is Olin's entrepreneurship program. And I've had some experience starting several early stage ventures. So.
Great, thanks you guys. So I thought what we do today is just start out and talk a little bit about their experiences, and I think this overlaps with what Thornton was talking about with regard to, being in an engineering institution. There's a tremendous overlap between the study of innovation and also entrepreneurship, and this is an example of, at its earliest stages, what happens at the intersection of both of those disciplines. So, our students are taking a lot of coursework when it comes to innovation, certainly engineering. They're doing a lot of design work, a lot of hands-on projects. And then some of that is exemplified directly in their entrepreneurial endeavors. But then again, like Hannah's company, she's applied her skill set to something that's very non-technical. And I think it'd be interesting for her and the others to share a little bit about what they've learned from some of the more practical experiences. So do you guys want to talk about maybe some of what the value of being here at Olin is with regard to entrepreneurship, and perhaps how it's contributed to your successes or your educational, the successes and failures, what you've learned?
Sure. I can start off with that one. One thing about here is, so first of all, Olin's a place where, of course, you sort of know everyone, where it's a small place to be. And because there were a fair number of people that were doing or interested in entrepreneurship, I think that really, in our case, really helped us going. One of the reasons why we decided to do this endeavor was because we saw 3 other older students, actually 1 year older than us, that also took a year off, except they had an interest in coffee. A very, very deep interest in coffee. Sort of high-end coffee equipment. They ended up making a new way to sort of heat and pour single cup coffee that's actually now in several really high-end coffee shops around here. So that was sort of a lot of inspiration for us as well, that sort of community and culture around sort of where we started. Another very specific Olin point that I think helped us get going was when we jumped off, we said we wanted to do something entrepreneurial, but that's about as far as our thinking had gone on that point. That's not a unconventional place to start for a lot of Olin projects. Actually, it's pick something you're interested in, do a lot of that first upfront finding in those types of projects. Specifically, we looked back at a class we have called user-oriented collaborative design, which sort of pick a user group you care about, talk to them and find out what they value, what they need. With the premise of, when you do that, you'll make something that something people want, as opposed to something looking for a market. And that's what we did. We chose middle school teachers and sort of set off doing that. And after talking to them for several months, using that sort of process, we sort of came upon the eventual idea of what we wanted to make for this sort of tool that students can use in classrooms to work together on projects, things that help teachers really personalize their lessons to kids. So yeah, there was certainly an amount of culture that was part of it, and a lot of sort of specific classwork as well, as addition to the program that the Entrepreneurship Foundry Program, which I'm sure you'll hear more about too.
Right. I want to touch on the point that Steve Gold started talking about, but at Olin we teach a lot more entrepreneurial thinking as opposed to teaching engineering students to become entrepreneurs. I think most of the graduates from Olin College don't become entrepreneurs, so that's not necessarily what we want to be teaching. But one thing that, for example, the introductory class for business and entrepreneurship, it's called Fundamentals of Business and Entrepreneurship. What that class does really well is teach the skill sets that entrepreneurs have to engineers so that engineers can apply it in their own world. So you get a lot more entrepreneurial types of engineers. So I know one example is that I think every year there's one of the software engineering groups at Olin. They organize something called a hackathon, where for I think 24 hours they literally just create an idea and code away and just create it, which is something that you kind of see at entrepreneurship events, startup boot camps, things like that. So I think that's one thing that Olin really does well.
Chris mentioned most of our students will not go on to start their own ventures, at least not certainly out of college. But one of the things that we really want to emphasize is that you can be entrepreneurial, and that entrepreneurial behaviors can be very, very effective in any setting, whether that be as students continue their studies in graduate school, whether that be in corporations, or whether that be doing something in the for-profit or nonprofit world or on their own. So how about, Hannah, how would you say that your experience this summer, how did that sort of intersect with your engineering and entrepreneurship studies otherwise?
So in doing something that was basically completely unrelated to engineering, it was actually interesting how much we were able to learn from that experience. In any case, we had to go through a lot of different levels of communication to get started initially. So we ended up learning a lot about how, like, the Needham Board of Health works and what you have to do to get the right certifications. So a lot of that actually, will apply in engineering fields. Learning to figure out who you need to talk to before you can get started in an area. So I think there was still a lot of value in that.
Eamon, how about, so tell us a little bit more about your venture, because yours is unique in that, if I understood correctly, you set out with this vision with several classmates to do contract design and development work, and certainly everybody. Did every member of the team have a full-time job initially out of school, or? And so that's something that you've had to develop and be very creative with over outside, of normal working hours. So how has that taken shape, and how has your Olin experience influenced what's happened?
Well, for starters, we have 4 divisions of our company. We have one in Boston, one in Virginia, got one in California, and another one up in Washington. So we have 4 locations already, which is we're growing quickly. So as Steve mentioned, we all of my classmates and I had full-time jobs coming out of school, and to boot, we were all in 4 different states. So sort of, I think one of the biggest things for us was trying to learn both how to, or rather, learn how to do contract engineering design, which wasn't a far cry from a lot of the projects we started at Olin, just with different stakeholders other than our teachers. But I also think that there was an element of trying to figure out how to do distributed engineering, which is a lot trickier than we originally had anticipated. And there was a number of hiccups that occurred in the beginning and also that are still occurring that we're working through in terms of just making sure that people are staying on task and that the tasks that are getting done are really what you want done and not what one person thinks is good for a project that maybe turns out they didn't quite understand what the rest of the team was looking for. But I think that Olin did a good job of teaching us communication skills and also just teaching us how to dive into a project without a full understanding of all of the topics needed to complete it. And then as, along the road of doing the project, just pick up the skills and tools necessary to basically see it to completion.
So why don't we open it up to questions so we can see what your interests are in terms of learning about what we do here at Olin at the intersection of engineering and entrepreneurship and innovation, and then we'll take it from there.
I have a quick opening question, if I could, because we're talking about entrepreneurial thinking. What's the contrast? I mean, what is non-entrepreneurial thing? I mean, I don't see a lot of people, in the Fortune 500 saying, "I pride myself on being a non-entrepreneurial thinker." I mean, or how do you do the compare and contrast? So.
Well, it actually turns out that there's been quite a lot of very serious research on this, and much of it was originated going back perhaps a decade or so. A woman, a researcher, professor down at University of Virginia Darden School. Her name is Sara Sarasvathy, and she studied very, very carefully the distinction between the behaviors of expert entrepreneurs versus others in general, people in society in general. And first of all, I mean, clearly there were some subjective decisions made about who constitutes an expert entrepreneur because, as you know, oftentimes we can look at somebody and say, wow, they're really entrepreneurial. You look at Steve Jobs or Richard Branson in their early days, people like that. And there's certainly many, many people that we just look at and we know they've gone out into the world, they've taken risks, supposedly, they've started their own ventures, sort of written their own ticket and gone down their own path. And so what she did is she actually identified many of these individuals and interviewed over 100 of them to date. And these are very, very comprehensive interviews that involved problem solving, and everything was transcribed and researched. In any case, to make a long story short, to answer Thornton's question, she actually came up with this concept that there are 2 kinds of behaviors that exist strategically that entrepreneurs, or these expert entrepreneurs that she interviewed, used much more frequently than the rest of us, let's say. And so she distinguished them into 2 categories. There's what she calls effectual logic and causal logic. And although all of us use both forms of logic in our lives, it turns out that entrepreneurs use this effectual logic about 50% of the time, whereas most of us use it a much smaller proportion of the time. So I'll tell you what these 2 things are, and it is actually a critical distinction. So if I were to ask you how you would go about, let's see, you have a something that you want to accomplish, and so what might be the first step in seeking out to accomplish that? Just what's a simple first step? Ask questions.
Build a plan.
Build a plan. All right, fantastic. And so presumably, so for, I know it's sort of like loaded question, but basically you have something to build a plan around. You have a goal or an objective, right? And then you build a plan, and then you seek the resources to go ahead and accomplish the plan. That's a perfect example of causal logic. So that would be regarded in these studies, in this academic sense, as non-entrepreneurial logic, okay? That's a very important form of logic. It's absolutely required. If you're going to build a skyscraper or any major project, you want to be using causal logic. And that's the way many of us think, especially when it comes to big projects. Step one is you set a goal, or you have to define a goal. Step two is you figure out, create a plan, what resources you're going to need and so forth. Step three is you pull together the resources and you move forward and accomplish your goal, hopefully. That's causal logic. What she found is that expert entrepreneurs actually use a very different form of logic, especially in the formative stages of their ventures. And it starts like this. They have no goal. They figure out what the resources they are first, who they know, what they can do. Essentially, she calls this her bird in hand theory. And then what these entrepreneurs do is they figure out with the resources at hand, what can I accomplish using those resources? And a goal emerges from that. So if you do studies of, for example, even the Inc. 500, fastest growing privately held companies and so forth, you find that the vast majority of these companies, most of them had no business plan to begin with. Those that had the business plan, approximately 70%, were completely off plan within 6 months. So there's a lot of, in any case, bottom line is causal logic is goal-driven logic. It's a goal-driven strategy. Effectual is resource-driven. And so what we teach our students is a lot of just an awareness that both of these forms of logic or strategy exist. And that's very, very important, we believe, to them, especially as young entrepreneurs or going out into the world, because they don't have the resources that all of you do. They don't have organizations behind them. They don't have the dollar resources. They don't have the knowledge, the experience. So it's exactly what all of them are describing. I mean, Eamon's gone out into the world with 3 other friends and basically started a design consultancy. And he's been very effectual with it. Basically, they figured out who they knew. I believe your first major contract, which hopefully gets signed very soon, is probably a relationship that you had established here through Olin. They figured out what their capabilities are, so what their internal, what they're capable of doing. That's exactly what they are doing. They're not trying to strive to do things that are beyond their capabilities, and so on and so forth. So I hope that answers the question. Sort of a long-winded reply, but I think it was a very good question, and it goes to what we actually teach here, which is a focus on things like effectual logic, effectual strategy, effective communication, resourcefulness, and all the things that go behind that.
It's also very similar to it's also very similar to the research they've done on survival of extreme incidents, so shipwrecks and the into thin air, all those guys. That the people that survive really understand the situation they're in. They really understand the resources they have. They just are one step ahead of it. They're trying to plan one step ahead of it. It's not coming up with a grand plan that based on experience logic. So this is the way it's worked in the past. And some of that has been faulty because it's just because of the way they've had experiences, but really understanding the situation they're in and the resources they have has gotten them out where other people have died.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. In fact, I've been reminded that this semester because one of the descendants of Ernest Shackleton is actually in my class, and so it's I
Not too intimidating.
not too intimidating. So
Don't go sailing with them.
that's right. But you raise a really great point that I think extreme situations are a perfect example of where effectual logic, it's just by virtue of circumstance, you have no other choice, right? You can't plan ahead. You can't think about the resources that are thousands of miles away. And you're very much living in the moment, trying to make the most use of what you have. And I'm not sure if being here at Olin or graduating and becoming an entrepreneur after college is such an extreme circumstance, but certainly it benefits from the same approaches.
I feel like it.
Yeah, that's right. I'm sure you do. Actually, do you maybe want to share some examples of where some of these techniques like effectuation have come into play in your business or other endeavors?
So my first real startup here that I worked on, it was last summer. We were developing, if you were here last May, I think, or whatever it was, you may have heard this, but it was basically an animatronic toy pet that would be linked with a virtual world. So think of something like a Furby, and then you can plug it into your computer and also play with it online and play with it with other people. And so that idea, when we first came up with it, well, definitely I hadn't taken the introductory class, so I didn't know this whole causal and effectual thinking. And so when I came up with it, you know, I thought of it as the big plan and the big goal, and here's where we're going to go, and now we have to create the plan. And in the end, we really weren't able to create the plan. We weren't able to pull together the resources required because the resources that were required for that scale of a project were just astronomical, and it was unfeasible. Then learning from that project and taking the introductory class and everything, kind of modified what we were doing, and I decided to start another venture with a friend over at Babson, and it was basically a professional photo editing service. Now, why professional photo editing? I'm a photographer, and I know how to do photo editing, and so when I look at photos that I think could be a lot better with like 10 minutes of touch-up work, I really cringed to myself. So I thought to myself, what does this startup require? It requires somebody to do the photo editing in the beginning, somebody to make a website, and somebody to start advertising. And those three things were things that between me and him, we both had. And we were able to be a lot more successful. Unfortunately, we didn't see the sales that we thought we would, but at the same time, I still would say that we were a lot more successful than with my original venture. So.
I mean, it was interesting for me to watch Chris through these processes because you spent much of last year developing this large-scale project, which was a lot of planning. There was some prototyping, and you know, as we all know, the creation of virtual worlds or electromechanical toys, things like that, with USB interfaces and software, massive undertaking. But you know, we just allowed, as we do with all our students, I mean, they're free to pursue their own interests. And it was fascinating for me to see Chris do this. And you were able to, formed a corporation, you raised some money around it, you did all those things, and there were a lot of people that were very gracious in wanting to help. And at the end of the day, you made the decision, I think appropriately, that this was way beyond what could be accomplished while you were in school. But then, so that took quite some time. And then I remember seeing you one day in the back of class creating a website.
I wasn't in the class, I was the teacher's assistant.
Oh, okay, all right. Just that's right, exactly. That's
Don't let
exactly.
anybody know.
So, but this happens more often than not. So, but I recall that within a matter of probably about 3 weeks, you had a website up and running, and we're basically, you know, very rapidly on the path to, you know, to securing your first customers, and you partnered, and you did all the things that we've described for an effectual project. So it's really interesting to compare the two.
Yeah, I do want to say that one thing that Olin did well, and one thing that specifically Steve did well with the original project was he sat down with me and told me basically it wouldn't work. And I said, I still want to try it anyways. And he said, okay. And the point is that Olin lets you fail, and Olin lets you fail relatively cheaply. We didn't do it relatively cheaply, but it still lets you do that. Most other projects do. Yep. Yeah, that's one thing that it's a really big value add for the Foundry program. We have a house on Great Plain Avenue, and the house is basically startup incubation and office space for startups. And what it lets startups here at Olin do is fail fast, fail cheaply, fail often. And I've done all three. So
Very successfully, I might add.
But I've learned a heck of a lot from that. So yeah.
So a question for the panel that is a fascination of mine. To get something off the ground and started, and coming out of a college of engineering, how much would you attribute the ratio of the technology innovation to get started with a new venture as opposed to the business model innovation to succeed? And then how did that priority or ratio shift as you established yourself? So, for example, the bakery business is was there a technology innovation, or was there more of a business model distribution innovation? So I'm curious what your comments are there.
Sure. So it's we didn't have too much of a technical focus. We were able to use some of the both my partner and I were freshmen before we did our business, so we hadn't taken actually my partner had taken the fundamentals of business and entrepreneurship class, and that was actually really helpful for us because we were trying to go more on the business model side. So we were trying to identify what market we could go into, and we found our strength. Well, we really liked baking, and everyone said, "Oh, your cookies are really good. Like, you should sell these." So that was what we knew that we could do well, and so we had to find a way to get that out into a broader market. So we did a lot more, I think, on the business side of figuring out, what can we do that's not already being done. So I guess, I don't know if that answers your question.
I just wanted to say, in watching Hannah and her partner through the semester, that it's very much a learning process for me as well to be seeing all these experiments going on. And I was fascinated. It actually raised a question in my mind of what's the distinction between business model and sort of design or product development innovation, or even process, that these things are very, very tightly integrated. And, Hannah had the potential. There may have been some areas where she could have innovated, but then was clever enough to figure out that it was a whole lot cheaper just to find their way into Olin's kitchen. It was already certified. Nobody else was in there. All these other things. So it's, I think that was a really fascinating thing that came out of your project.
And I'd just like to echo something that Hannah mentioned, and that's the idea that you really need to differentiate yourself to be successful, because there are a lot of people that are very technically competent in their respective areas of study. And so in terms of doing technological innovation, I think a lot of people can do that. But trying to combine that with business innovation is tricky. And if you Google engineering consultancy, you get something like 1.5 billion hits, which is rather daunting. So trying to, not be the needle in the haystack and, make yourself the #1 hit when someone types in, like automotive consultancy engineering or something like that, and really trying to place yourself where your skills can be used, I think is an important process to go through for an entrepreneur.
Do you guys want to add anything to that? Or, one of the other concepts I'll raise that comes up especially poignant in this setting where I work with obviously young people who may or may not have access to significant resources, whatever that might be, whether it's large teams or large amounts of cash, that there is a distinction that comes out of this same research from Saraswati that relates to risk and the difference in the ways that we look at risk. And she suggests from her research that expert entrepreneurs actually don't look at the probability of something succeeding or failing. They actually look at the risk equation, in quotes, very differently. And she uses the term affordable loss. And what that means essentially is that it's not a matter, it's very hard, especially in an entrepreneurial venture, or especially with a product innovation, to actually truly predict perhaps what the market's going to be, what the costs are going to be. And perhaps large corporations can do this with their extensive data sets and market surveys and so forth, but it's not practical for students. So the concept of affordable loss kicks in, which is really like, what am I going to lose? And it's not what's the probability of losing it, but rather, can I afford to lose it? So, for some students, that might be, tens of dollars. For other students, it might be tens of thousands of dollars. And the key here, and this was brought up by Chris, is really experimentation. That, failure, especially in this academic setting, but I imagine there are also elements within the corporate setting where employees, team members would have the ability to safely experiment, that they'd know here at Olin that part of the experiment is to fail. That if you're not failing at least some significant portion of the time, you're not testing yourself and you're not trying hard enough. And so it's not a matter of if you're going to fail, you are going to fail. And we view that as being successful. It's a matter of just, it can't be a mission critical failure. You don't want the failure to just take you out of play.
I want to go back to the question about innovation technology and innovation business model. I just kind of realized, so I would say that about, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say about half and half businesses at the Foundry and Olin are business model innovation, half are technological innovation. We have things like the Big Belly Solar trash can. I'm not sure if you know what that is, but it's basically a solar-powered trash compactor, trash can that's on the streets of many cities. And that was a project that came out of Olin. And at the same time, we have things like the bakery and even a professional photo editing service, which is no technological innovation. But at the same time, I think we do bring something else, something new to the table. When you type in a Google search for professional photo editing, of course, you get a ton of results, just like the engineering consultancy. But it's how do you differentiate yourself? So, for example, for our startup, our target market was a little bit of the older crowd who want to preserve their home photo memories, put them on the wall and things like that. So we knew that we had to make a very
Before we lose it totally, right?
Yeah. So we had to make a site that was very accessible for our market, and that's something that we didn't find in the rest of the website. So we made our site very easy to use, and that's one of the main features of it, one of the benefits. So even though you don't have the technological innovation 100% of the time, I think that Olin students do bring a really good understanding of what the user wants and how to innovate in that field as opposed to the technology.
Yeah, it's a fascinating dichotomy to say, all right, for example, search, and then the business model of search called advertising, right? Social networking, and the business model of social networking. What is that? And so you can take a look at all these things and ask the question, which was the driver and which was the reason for the success. And it's something that, again, as an entrepreneur myself, and as you guys go and do more of these things, you'll find yourselves wondering, all right, which was the reason why we exited or had fun and made an income that was reasonable for a long time or worked for ourselves? Is that your measure of success? And so it's a very interesting continuum, and it's more complex than we can address in a single panel, certainly.
Yeah, one of the, in my opinion, more interesting things that Olin does is we try, especially through the Foundry program, pretty hard to have, because it's such an engineering school, have people not start innovating at the technology. Like it's very easy to just starting with the idea, the widgets, the things that will fly faster, better, further. One of the things that I think works pretty well here is really try and start that innovation at the user, at sort of the need that they want, and really try and get at it from that perspective, which is why we sort of have this strong design curriculum as well. And I think that's why at Olin you also see a fair number of other businesses that are not necessarily exclusively technology focused, but still have that sort of technical background, which is pretty key for us. I know back at the beginning there's a question about what was the difference between like this why would you not want entrepreneurial thinking? So clearly, it's one of the things we do is just try and change this effectual paradigm within students. But another sort of just simpler thing we try and do is just the perspective that it is more than just the technology that it takes to make a business. And I think a lot of just traditional core engineering programs that just focus on the mechanics and the formula behind things, it's very, very easy to lose sight of that. So certainly trying really hard to have that sort of have those extra dimensions. So the business, the user-focused design paradigms really, really help in terms of getting these different types of businesses out. Something that can address the needs of people and things like that.
If I could ask another way, I mean, as our future, and we have corporate America out here, what type of thinking do you use to make your choice as to where you involve yourself, if you will? I mean, you choose a general area where you're interested. I mean, for example, healthcare or or automotive or something. How are you going to make the next life decisions as you come down the pike? A small question. Meaning of life to black, please. There we go.
Well, that was a dumb one.
I'm gonna go with dartboard. Yeah. No, it's not that. It's not quite that random. I think that I don't know that I can answer that question for every aspect of my life, just across the board. But I know that at least from a work perspective, both in my consulting firm and also in my day job at Athena Health, the choice to involve myself, I think it's just I just take a look at what the problem at hand is, or what tasks need to be accomplished, and just ask myself, are these something that is my responsibility, and is this something that is going to get done if I don't step in? And is this something that is getting done in a way that it will get done, but it could get done better if I step in? And if the answer to any of those questions is, yes, I have the skills, or no, it won't get done without me, or yes, I need to redirect it, then I definitely make the decision to step into that situation and sort of not necessarily take control, but try to direct it in an appropriate manner. So I think that's a little bit less about my life choices and more about my business choices, I suppose. As for the life choices, I'd say I do what's interesting.
So there are a lot of people I know that are on a track, right? The specific school that you want to go to, the specific entry job you want, and then on from there. I am not one of those people. That's probably just me. However, I have noticed that that's disproportionately true for a relatively large number of OIL learners as well. I feel like there are many people who want sort of the med school track or the law school track, but I seem to see a lot of people that always end up in places that I would not have expected them to be in the beginning. There's certainly areas that I have skills and interested in. Specifically for me, it's sort of it's design, it's computer science, it's web technologies, it's something entrepreneurial, things like that. But for me personally, the concept of sort of having this 8-year plan in front of me, especially coming from sort of this world of sort of just trying to change things as they go entrepreneurially, is starting to reflect itself in sort of the choices I'm going to have to make in the very, very near future. In terms of what of opportunities I want to decide to go to in the future. Some of them are much more set than others, so we'll see where that goes.
Since we're in part of industry, I guess the one, people can hear it over there if they're looking for it. What would be your advice to all of us before we become corrupted and polluted with corporate thought? What should we do for effectual learning or thoughts into the industry?
Do things like what you're doing right now. Come to Olin Innovation Lab. Think about innovation and drive innovation in your company. Because I think that's number one, that a lot of students are actually, they kind of don't want to go into corporate America because the perception is that corporations don't have innovation. They're slow, they're bulky, and they can't move. So do exactly the opposite.
How are you defining innovation, and what specifically would you want to see?
Well, I mean, I think as a student, a lot of younger folks are more interested in Facebook and Google and things like that. And what they're seeing, for example, at Google, is that they're diving into markets that are just completely unrelated to them, but they're still moving forward and moving ahead. I would say that it's a lot of product innovation that we see. We see probably less of the business model innovation because we're probably less familiar with it, but we're a lot more familiar with the products that they create. So. Does that answer? Okay.
My experience, a lot of companies are very failure averse. And there are significant penalties accrue to people who fail at their projects or don't deliver the results that are anticipated. Is that your experience? I mean, I see a lot of nodding heads here, right? So that's a cultural hurdle to overcome in taking the perspective you have on innovation and your ability to fail safely into a corporate situation.
I'll just mention on that point, because Olin benefits from some fascinating perspectives, especially from some of our trustees and President's Council members. One of our trustees is Sunlin Chao, who used to head up technology and development globally for Intel. And he's now retired, but he spent over 30 years there and is regarded as a true expert in innovation. And one of the things that he's really drilled into us is that that projects should fail. They should fail very quickly and at the least possible cost. And I know that's easier said than done, but one of the things that we do try to do here, and I think that it's of interest to many of our students, because it gets to the question of things becoming staid or sort of corporate, is that experimentation should be allowed, but clearly in a controlled way. So we try to do that in the educational setting. I understand completely that that's not as simple to do in the corporate setting. I think that's why some of this 20% time and so forth has been implemented in certain companies. But that's just one possible mechanism. And I think my observation of our young people, our graduates and soon-to-be graduates, is that's what they're looking for. They don't want to just be told what to do. They want to be given some semblance of meaning. They want to be allowed to come up with their own ideas and continue to learn and grow. Whether or not that benefits the company and whether or not that fits into any particular corporate setting, that's another question. But I think that's what my observation is, that these folks are looking for.
Yeah, Oliners have this. One of the things that draws a lot of us is Post-it notes. For some reason, the kind of activities that we like, there's this fun one where you throw as many ideas as you can on as many Post-it notes you can on a board, and the point is to try and think of the craziest ones you can and the most mundane ones you can, and hopefully meet somewhere in the middle. That kind of activity is a great thing to do. I probably don't think it'd be a good idea to do with $1 billion product on the line. But certainly something on the, I'm going back to sort of specific things that have worked in big companies. I know Oliners have found great times in sort of these small skunkworks like projects, the Intuit iLab, or like other sorts of Microsoft's Fuse Labs, or other sorts of like smaller operations where that is sort of the point there too. And so certainly something, another subtle thing I've noticed too is that just between myself and freshmen, I feel like our perspectives on the world, just as a whole, are slightly different. Like, when you talk about generational gaps, before that used to be in the terms of decades, the fact that they grew up with the social networking tools that I started using later makes a huge difference. The point I'm trying to make there is that, cycling new people in, to think and put in charge of things, like, that time scale is now on the scale of, the difference between Eamon and Hannah here.
You calling me old?
That's right. You're one of our alumni. Holy, yeah. At Olin College, we have this funny thing. We put tradition in quotes because it's we're not that old. But it's just I don't know.
So I just wanted to sort of echo a point. I'm not sure what your name is, Bill, that you made about the need to have a sort of, let's see, how do I want to put this? I'm just going to start over. So I'm a product manager at Athena Health, so I actually am more concerned with the business side than the technical side, and part of my job is collaborating with developers to deliver a product and deliver updates to the software, deliver new software. And so in that job, I've had the opportunity to work with a number of different developers at the company, and I think that the most effective projects and the projects that not only accomplished their goals, but also sort of tacked on some extra goodies or some extra things that really, I thought, highlighted that project and that part of the software and really sort of brought extra value to the table were the ones that I was working with a developer or developers who, you know, had an understanding of our business and our goals. And I've worked with some developers who they don't really care to worry about the business, and frankly, I mean, their view is it's not their job and they're developers. And I'm definitely not a software developer, but on those projects where I've worked with someone who had an idea of the business side, because I'm very interested in the software and technical side in addition to the business, those ones where everyone really has a common, I don't want to call it a goal, but just a common viewpoint, an understanding of what everyone is there trying to do. You don't end up with the technical and the business sides butting heads so much, and you end up feeding off of each other. And I think that that's a really important thing to remember, because that's a complaint I've heard from people who started much earlier when the company was a startup, and you know, the developers were the product managers. Everyone just did everything, and the segmentation, I know, is beginning to frustrate some people. And so that's it.
Professor, do you have any closing comments as we look at it? It's just about time to, now, even though we're old, we still do delight in the educational experience, and it's almost time for recess for us. Cool!
So I don't have any extraordinary insights here. It's basically, I think that the one thing that I've noticed, and I do work at the convergence of the entrepreneurial and the corporate worlds with a lot of consulting and teach several classes as well, is that we really need to listen to our young people today. I think that they are the future of the workforce. I think especially the students here at Olin and other wonderful colleges, these are the best of the best. And you know, they're thinking on sort of how their minds work. Evan's comment on the generation gap shrinking at this exponential rate, I think it's really, these are extraordinary forces at work, and I think that they have huge implications for how to keep our companies competitive and innovative, and you know, that's really the message here. So thank you very, very much, you guys. Really appreciate it. Thank you.